What I never expected at 35 was that the man I lived with for 12 years would sell our house to his lover for $1. The real story began when I decided to show him just how seriously he had underestimated me. The keys felt heavy in my hand as I stood before what was supposed to be our dream house. We spent 3 years planning every detail, from exposed wooden beams to a spacious veranda where we dreamed of growing old together. But now, that house belonged to Sarah, his 23-year-old mistress. John sold it to her for less than the price of a cup of coffee. My name is Emily Smith. I'm 35, and I never thought I'd have to start over at this age. But here I am, watching my husband of 12 years pack his things with the smug smile of a man confident in his victory. "You can't do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though everything inside me was trembling. "We built this house together." John barely looked up from his suitcase. "Actually, I built it. My name is on all the documents, remember? You were too busy with your law practice to deal with the boring details, as you called them." He was right about one thing. I completely trusted him to handle the construction while I was building my career as a real estate attorney. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. "So you just sold the house to her for $1? I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His smirk widened. "It's a perfectly legal transaction, Emily. You should know this best. $1 is quite enough to transfer ownership. The document is already registered, and you can't do anything about it." I remembered the document I found just hours ago buried in a pile of construction papers. John wasn't as clever as he thought, and certainly not as cautious. "You're right," I said quietly. "The document is registered, every page of it." Something in my tone made him freeze. He looked at me and his confidence wavered slightly. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied, heading to the door. "I hope you and Sarah will be happy here, but I suggest you read the fine print before you get too comfortable." "What fine print?" he shouted after me, but I was already leaving. Let him figure it out himself. I got in the car and drove to my office. Thoughts swirled in my head. Everything changed 2 weeks ago when I stayed late at the law firm. A colleague came in, looking awkward. "Emily," she said hesitantly at the door, "I think you should see this. Some good acquaintances passed me a document, and it concerns you." She handed me the deed to our dream house transferred from John to Sarah Collins for just $1. The date on the document was 3 days old. I sat there staring at the paper, feeling the ground shifting under my feet, but shock quickly turned to resolve. I was a real estate attorney, and if John thought he could outsmart me in my own field, he was in for a painful lesson. The next 2 days I spent going through every document related to the house's construction. John insisted that everything be in his name, saying it was easier since he was handling the construction. I agreed, trusting him fully. And here's what I found buried in those papers. The agreement included a particular clause that John either missed or failed to read. It was a standard condition for new homes in our area. If the property is sold below market value within the first 5 years, it triggers an automatic audit by the county tax office. But it was more than just an audit. The conditions stated that in such a case, the house would be revalued at current market value, and the difference between the sale price and this value would be immediately taxed, with the seller paying the tax. Our house was worth $2,800,000. John sold it for $1. The tax bill would be massive, and he would have to pay it. Best of all, this condition was in the deed's restrictions, which transferred with the property. He'd soon find out, likely when the tax office contacted him about the revaluation. Now my phone vibrated. A message from John. "What have you done?" I ignored it. focusing instead on another document I found, a bank statement showing transfers from our joint account to John's separate account. He'd been siphoning money in preparation for leaving, but he'd made one fatal error. He'd used our joint account to pay for the house's construction. Every cent spent was from joint assets in our state, meaning I could claim half the house's value, regardless of whose name was on the documents. Another message from John. "Answer me, Emily. What's the fine print?" I put the phone down and opened the county tax office's website. Everything was going according to plan. There was already a record stating that an audit was underway as a result of the recent sale. John would receive official notification any minute. The phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, but I sent it to voicemail. Let him stew. I spent the rest of the day in the office, preparing documents for a joint asset division lawsuit, a motion for an urgent injunction against further property transactions, and a detailed account of every penny spent on the house. By the time I left the office, I had 7 missed calls from John and a dozen increasingly panicked messages. The last one read, "Did you know about this? Did you know it would happen?" Of course I knew. I was a real estate attorney specializing in deals and tax law. Did he really think I wouldn't find a way to protect myself? I drove home to our apartment, the one I insisted on keeping despite the house's completion. John wanted to sell it right away, but something stopped me. Maybe a part of me sensed what was coming. When I parked, John's car was in the guest space. He was waiting at the entrance, pacing back and forth. His former smugness had turned into barely contained panic. "Do you know what you've done?" He pounced on me as soon as I approached. "The tax bill is more than I earn." I typed in the door code without looking at him. "That's unfortunate," I replied calmly. "You have to help me fix this." He followed me inside. "You can lift the restriction from the deed, please, Emily. I'll lose everything." I turned to him, looking into his desperate eyes. The man I loved for 12 years, who betrayed me at every turn, was now begging for help. "You've already lost everything," I said quietly. "You lost it when you decided to give away our home to your girlfriend. The tax bill is just a consequence of your decisions." "I'll dispute this," he threatened. "I'll say I didn't know about the clause." I laughed. "Go ahead, try. You signed the contract, John. You're a businessman. Everyone expects you to have read and understood the documents. But please, tell the judge how you transferred a nearly $3 million house for just $1 without looking at the restrictions. I'm sure it will leave an impression." His face turned pale as reality began to sink in. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want nothing from you," I repeated. "You've made your choice. Now live with it." I opened the apartment door and walked in, leaving him in the hallway. His voice followed through the door. "What about Sarah?" "She can't handle the house's taxes either." "Then she'll probably have to sell it," I replied. "I hope she makes more than $1 out of it." I closed the door, cutting off his protests, and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The first phase had worked. My plan was in motion. The next day, papers for the division of assets were to be delivered to John, and the day after that, notifications for an urgent injunction against property transactions. By the end of the week, he'd find out that his attempts to hide our joint money would backfire on him. The phone vibrated again. Another message from John. "We can settle this, please. I made a mistake." I muted it and poured myself a glass of wine. He was right about one thing. He had made plenty of mistakes, but the biggest was underestimating and betraying me. In the morning, I arrived at the office early, and there were 3 envelopes with documents for John, ready to be sent. I checked the phone. 5 missed calls and a stream of desperate messages. The tax office had called. a $980,000 bill. Please help. Sarah is panicking. She can't handle the house's taxes. We can negotiate. What's your price? I put the phone down and opened the county tax site. Everything was perfect. The transfer of the house to Sarah was officially registered. She was now responsible for the ongoing property taxes, and John was liable for the massive transfer tax. At 9 a.m., Mark Chen, the forensic accountant I hired, walked into the office. He brought a thick folder. "You're right," he said without preamble. "The money trail is obvious. Your husband didn't just use the joint account for the house. He was transferring assets for months." He spread out the documents, statements, transfers, investment accounts. John had been preparing for this longer than I thought. "Good news," Mark continued. "He covered his tracks terribly. Every transaction is documented. He used your account as an intermediary, thinking it would make tracking harder. Instead, we have the full picture." "How much in total?" I asked. "Just over $3,200,000, excluding the house." The figure hit like a punch. All those years together, and he planned to take everything. The phone vibrated again. "The bank is threatening to freeze my accounts. What did you do?" I responded to the divorce petition, and the judge approved the urgent asset freeze when he saw evidence of the machinations. Later, Sarah called, her voice trembling. "Ms. Smith, we need to talk about the house." "You mean your house?" I clarified. "The one you bought for $1? "I didn't know about the taxes," she quickly said. "John didn't tell me. I can't pay them, and the bank denied the loan." "Because you have no equity in the property," I finished for her. "You paid just $1. I don't know what to do. John's accounts are frozen, and I don't have that kind of money." I thought for a moment. She was slightly older than my younger sister. I felt sorry for her on a human level. "Sell it," I finally said. "It's your best option. Taxes are due in 30 days. Selling now, you can cover them and take something for yourself." "Won't John be mad?" she asked. "His anger isn't your problem," I almost laughed. "He used you as a pawn, and it backfired on him. My advice, leave while you can and don't get involved with anyone like John again." She paused. "He said, 'You want to take the house. That's why he put it in my name.'" "I don't want the house," I replied. "I want justice." "And you ended up in the middle of what will soon become a very messy situation. Sell and leave." After hanging up, I realized John's plans were collapsing, and he didn't yet know how badly he'd miscalculated. The following days flew by in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. John hired one of the best lawyers in town, but even he couldn't dispute the paper trail left behind. Every transaction, every account, every attempt to hide our joint assets was documented. The tax bill arrived as expected. $980,000 for the house transfer, due immediately. John's lawyer tried to argue the clause in the contract was unfair, but the judge disagreed. It was standard practice in our area, and John had signed the documents voluntarily. A week after all this began, Sarah called again. "I'm selling the house," she said. "Found a buyer willing to pay market value. Just thought you'd like to know." "It's a smart decision," I replied. "John is furious," she continued. "Says I'm betraying him, that I should be grateful for everything he did for me." She laughed bitterly. "Like putting me into this situation is a favor." I suddenly felt unexpected pity for her again. "You owe him nothing, Sarah. He used you to hurt me and didn't care what happened to you afterward." After the call, I opened the last bank statement sent by Mark. John's attempts to hide assets had left a clear trail that ensured the fair division of property in the divorce. Sarah sold the house 2 weeks later for $2,900,000. She paid the property taxes from the proceeds and left with enough to start anew. I heard she returned to her hometown in Oregon. John, meanwhile, was reaping the repercussions of his actions. The tax bill wiped out most of his liquid assets, and the divorce revealed the full extent of his financial chicanery. His once pristine reputation in business circles lay in ruins. One evening, while I was in the apartment going over settlement documents, the phone vibrated. A message from John. "You destroyed everything I built." I considered replying, reminding him that we built it together and that he had torn it all apart. But instead, I put the phone down and looked at the city lights outside the window. The dream house was gone. A lovely family with 3 children bought it who would appreciate it. The life I had planned with John ended, but in its place, something new emerged, stronger, based on my resilience. The phone vibrated again. "I didn't think you'd fight like this." That was his fundamental mistake. All those years he saw me as a trusting wife who left the details to him and forgot who I truly was. Forgot that I understand property law better than he ever will, and that I know how to protect myself when it matters. The most unpleasant thing was that he wanted to walk away cleanly and take jointly amassed assets with him. And notably, he wasn't above involving a young girl to whom he promised wealth and love. I wouldn't be surprised if he later tried to deceive her too. The final divorce settlement was more than fair, an equal division of assets as required by law. John's attempts to hide money only strengthened my position, forcing him to reveal all accounts and transfers. 6 months later, I sat in my new office. I had recently been made a partner in a firm. The view of the city was stunning, but most of all, I valued the inner peace. The pain of betrayal sometimes still reminded me of itself, but it no longer defined me. The phone vibrated, a message from my sister. "I saw John in a restaurant yesterday. Looked awful. Are you okay?" I smiled, remembering how far I'd come since I learned about the house transfer. "Better than okay," I replied. "I'm free." And it was true. Free from the burden of betrayal, from the need to prove something to anyone. John tried to take everything from me, but eventually he only showed how strong I was. The dream house disappeared from my life, but I stood my ground, which, as I realized, was worth more than any property deed. I no longer looked back with regret. Instead, I looked forward to the new chapter I was building myself. My career flourished, and the apartment I once insisted on keeping became my refuge, a place where I could be myself. One day, I received a letter from John's lawyer with a proposal to settle the last details. I reviewed it and set it aside. Everything had already been decided. His life was falling apart. Debts, a tarnished reputation, loneliness. Sarah left, the house sold, and the money he tried to hide returned to me as the law required. He underestimated me, and it became his greatest failure. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window, looking at the city lights. Somewhere out there was a family enjoying the house John and I once planned. I didn't regret it. It belonged to the past. My future was here, in the present, built on my resilience and knowledge. I knew I could endure anything, and that confidence became my true home. Did you like the story? Write your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next interesting story. See you tomorrow.